So Joey, here's the thing. I've realized that on Angeles Crest, like in the canyons, all of the fast drivers are typically in their like 40s and 50s. They have dead bods, right?
Yes.
So you can tell that they have muscle underneath that layer of fat. It's like very snugly fitted. But then if you look at all the professional drivers, they're almost always like 5'8" to like 5'11", skinny, athletic, impeccable smile, and short hair. Why is that? I mean, is there like a scientific reason behind that, or?
It's interesting because I don't necessarily know if there is a direct scientific reason to an exact height for being a racing driver, but we are generally more on the smaller side. And I think that's because unlike other sports like, football, basketball, or baseball, where, being tall and strong has a significant advantage, in racing, the only requirement height-wise is can you fit in the car. So obviously, if you're, over 6'3", it's going to be a challenge in some cars, like a Miata. But generally speaking, the average, male height of, 5'8" to 5'11" seems to work pretty well. It's generally car specific because sometimes you can work around it, but definitely being in the, 5'8" to 5'10" range is kind of perfect, as your body will naturally fit the most amount of cars.
Got it. And then I don't even remember how we met. I think we met during one of the Cup series, and I think you beat me, and the next time I beat you. Is that what it is? see, here's the thing. I'm always a little bit nervous when I talk to professional drivers because I feel like I'm just showing off kung fu in front of Bruce Lee, so I have to like tune down a little bit.
No, bring it all.
Especially if I drive in front of a pro driver, I always get nervous, and then when I get nervous, understeer happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like when you say that understeer, it's like the F word of the automotive industry. Like if you say, "Oh, I spun off the road, I like oversteered," that's pretty cool because you were hardcore. Understeer is like, okay, this guy doesn't know how to drive.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also because the fact that you can control oversteer and make it look cool with drifting or power sliding.
Right.
But understeer, it doesn't look cool. You're just adding more and more wheel, and I think it's much more exciting to hit the tree with the car sideways than hit the tree going straight.
Oh, but I've also figured out two defenses to that. If you understeer, you can just first blame on the mechanic and say, oh, the suspension was not set up correctly. Or you can say that, oh, darn it, this car is a street car first, so it was set up to understeer.
Well, to be fair, majority of street cars are. And one thing I learned over the summer when learning how to do an alignment is that a lot of road cars from the factory are set to toe in, which makes them inherently understeery.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so our Porsche Cayenne, that car has 1.5 mil of toe in on both sides, so a total of 3 mil toe in, which will make the car very understeery. But I understand from a safety point of view, you want an understeery car where traction control and the various stability control systems can save you, versus an oversteery car where those systems aren't going to save you as much.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense, right? Especially I feel like driving is such a mysterious topic of discussion for the regular consumers. Like when you think of like driving, I mean, it just like driving in a performance way, that's like so out of their consciousness.
Exactly. Most people driving is just simply what we're doing now, just cruising on the freeway, going to work or going to visit family, and it's not exciting. They just hop in their car and it takes them from A to B, and that's it. That's their only relationship with the car.
Right. So let's start slow and let's start segment from segment. I'll lead you through all of this to have the national audience get to know you a little bit more. So first of all, can you tell us your name, your age, and where you call home?
Yes. So my name is Joey Andrews. I am 19 years old, and I live in Glendale, California.
19 years old.
19, about to be 20.
When I was 19, I didn't even know what I was going to do in my life yet. And yet you're a pro driver already.
It's crazy.
Okay, well, we can skip that part because I don't want to talk about my misery 19-year-old. So I know that I called you a pro driver, but in your own words, how would you describe to the general public what your job/career is?
Yeah, I've kind of got a lot of hats on, to be fair. But I think generally from a driving point of view, I say to people that I'm an up-and-coming driver, but now that I'm backed by Mazda, there is an argument that am I professional? I'm definitely on the road to being a professional. So I would say for most people, I'd just say I'm a racing driver as the conversation starter.
Racing driver or race car driver?
I think racing driver is the more formal phrase, and I like the way it sounds better, but it's the same thing definition-wise as a race car driver. Or in the UK, they call it a race driver.
Got it.
But I think racing driver, it rolls off the tongue smoothly.
So recently, there's a huge event that happened in your life, and that's why you told us about the Mazda part of it. Explain what you did and the result of that, and then how your job title has changed with your current sponsor, Mazda.
Yes, so I just won the Mazda Spec MX-5 Shootout, and that is a competition that Mazda holds every year at the end of the year, where they look to support the next generation of young drivers. And the way the competition works is they start by looking around the country at all the young drivers looking to make a career in racing, and they select in their eyes, or what are the 50 drivers think to have the best potential, the best fit for Mazda. And they nominate those for the initial part of the competition. I was one of those 50 drivers lucky enough to be nominated. From there, Mazda then has us submit a video to them, answering many questions, explaining why we're excited about this opportunity, what we want our racing career to look like, and what's kind of our plans going into the future. And then in addition, we submit to them a written bio about why it'd be a good fit for the Mazda brand. And then finally, a CV of our racing results showing, what have we actually done on track. And the goal of that is they want to understand who we are as a driver, both on track and off track, because of course, as they say in racing, win on Sunday, sell on Monday. So being a racing driver isn't simply the on-track product. I was lucky enough to be one of those drivers selected into the final 12, where I was then invited to the competition this year, held at Homestead Miami Speedway. And that competition was going to be a 3-day event, where day 1 would be our seat fit and kind of meeting everyone, learning what the event was going to be like. And then day 2 and 3 was the on-track action, where we would actually be racing each other. Although it wasn't a typical race, as there were only 3 cars that we'd be sharing with teammates. So essentially Mazda wanted to see our lap times. But it wasn't simply about lap times, it was about consistency and how we operate with engineers and mechanics, and can we build a team around us. From there, Mazda then narrowed it down to 6 drivers for the final session to select who would become the next Mazda Factory Driver. And I was one of those drivers who made it to the final 6. To that point, I was like, holy moly, there's actually a chance of winning this. And that whole weekend, I was thinking to myself, well, I don't know. I mean, I've been quick, but I was only 4th fastest, and only the top 2 were going to get a spot. And that last session, I put everything together, just drove purely on instinct, and when we went to the podium ceremony and they called my name as one of the next Mazda Factory Drivers 2025 in Spec MX-5, I was lost for words, and I still feel on top of the world. It's an amazing title to say now.
And that's you.
That's me.
Joey Andrews, the new Mazda Factory Driver. Wow. What does a factory driver do?
Yes, so in Spec MX-5, a Mazda Factory Driver is a driver that is being backed and partially funded on their season by Mazda, driving one of Mazda's cars. And basically what Mazda is doing for us is not only helping us on the financial side of the season, but we're driving their cars, working with their team members, their engineers, their people on the business development side, helping us manage our career. And the goal essentially is to help us progress in our career and, show that Mazda's been there since the beginning, and essentially have them help push me forward. That's the big thing.
So the Mazda's always there. You get to use one of their cars. I'm assuming it's a MX-5?
Yes. So in Spec MX-5, it is the NC chassis. And so I'll be racing that series starting in January. And we'll be running in a series called the SCCA Super Tour. So we'll be racing all across the Midwest and the East Coast of the country on some of the best tracks that are well known, including Road America, Road Atlanta, VIR, Mid-Ohio, Watkins Glen, Sebring. And it's pretty amazing to say that. So there's some absolute bucket list tracks of mine that I've never been to.
So what does Mazda get out of having you as their drivers?
The big thing for Mazda is showing the reputation in the motorsport community that they genuinely care about bringing up the next generation. You know, the one challenge in motorsport is until you're at the very top level, you're not being paid to drive, and you actually have to find the funding to drive because the driver is the customer, and that's simply how the business model works. So no matter how good of a driver you are, if you don't have the money to race, it will not happen. So for Mazda, they want to show that we're going to use our corporate money to help these drivers and give them the chance that they deserve.
And so the factory drivers are paid by Mazda to race.
Yes.
Got it. And what kind of a role would you say, because you know there's like the motorsport, but there's also selling cars to consumers. Do you play a role in that consumer side of things too? You're racing?
As of right now, not yet, but there are a couple drivers who have been in Mazda commercials and definitely helped on the promotion and marketing side of the road cars. And that's definitely a goal of mine because I do love Mazda's road cars. And the biggest thing in motorsport is win on Sunday, sell on Monday. And one unique part about Mazda compared to other manufacturers is even though the NC chassis MX-5 is no longer in production, they still make all the parts for it. And also, the evolution of that car is not dead. They are still coming out with new upgraded parts for that car. So really, even though it's an older chassis, that car is still evolving. And it's our job to show, here's what these cars can do.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got into cars and what was the trigger point like? In other words, was there a single moment in time where you're like, oh, cars are cool, I might want to get into it?
I think the initial point, but I wouldn't really call it a trigger point. When I was younger, I'd always go for rides in my mom's Porsche Boxster, but I was never really a car enthusiast. I just thought driving's fun. But the real trigger point was when I was in 5th grade and I met my best friend Derek, and he always showed up to school in these classic cars his family worked on, and he'd always bring car magazines, and I'd sit there and read with him, and I was like, these are pretty cool. And one day he told me, he's like, Joey, you need to watch this TV show called Top Gear. So I went home from school that day, turned on the TV, watched Top Gear, instantly fell in love, and that was definitely the trigger point.
Got it. So it's like a friend influence.
Absolutely.
You know what they always say, it's like the nurture part of it, the environment that you're in is so important to a person's development.
And that's 100% correct. And I think for me, that was definitely the case of how I got into cars, was through Derek.
Got it. And then so from that point on, can you describe, because you know, loving cars and getting into motorsport are completely different things. What was the initial point or trigger point is for your motorsport decision making?
Yeah, the start of motorsport was really only a few months later, and there were 2 phases to it. Phase 1, I was 11 years old, and I said to my dad, I really want to go driving. And we were like, well, we don't know where we can go driving because you can't have a driver's license at 11 years old. So we just start Googling and we find indoor go-karting. So we went to the indoor go-kart place, instantly loved it, and I was like, this is cool. I want to go race cars, or at the time, race go-karts. But racing for me didn't really get serious until I was 14 years old when I found the outdoor go-karting track. And because I never came from a motorsport background, my only way into the sport was just through networking in the automotive community. And that's finally where I met someone who told me about Cal Speed Karting, which was the outdoor go-karting track in California, in Los Angeles at the time. And that's where it really all begun.
Got it. And then from the age of 14, you took it seriously. How long did it take you to kind of think to yourself, like, okay, maybe this is going somewhere?
I mean, in my head, of course, I'm going to say, oh, from day one, because I always imagined myself as a racing driver from the first day I drove a go-kart. But my parents definitely didn't. They saw it as a hobby. But when I was probably 16 years old, or actually, no, I would argue maybe even 15 years old during COVID, when I spent a lot of time sim racing as we had no racing available to us, that's where really things became serious. And my parents saw my passion, work ethic, and my vision on a first-hand point of view because I was home so much during that year. And that's where, when racing did finally return in the summer of 2020, they said, okay, it's really starting to ratchet up in the fact that I want to do this properly, full time.
So overall speaking, during your career thus far, since you were really 14 when you took it seriously, were your parents supportive, or were there some objections?
They were pretty supportive from the beginning, but there were definitely some objections. The biggest one was, obviously I had to stay in school, And most importantly, they also wanted to make sure that, you know, we were not overcommitting into something that was going to be a waste of time in the long term, meaning, you know, don't pour a bunch of time and money into something only for a few years later for me to be like, well, I'm not interested anymore. So there definitely were a couple objections there, but once they saw that I was dead serious about this, and then they also loved motorsport as well, it became a family adventure. And that's why, you know, all the races, both my parents go, where most kids, it's usually either the dad or often just by themselves.
Were there any time where you guys feel the financial burden?
Yes, I would say last year was definitely the first eye-opening season, because when you go from racing karting to cars, obviously you're in a machine that's way bigger and everything naturally costs more. So we knew that we had saved enough money to do one season of Spec Miata, and the idea was, I'll go race cars, we'll see what opportunities open, but realistically, like, we can't afford to go any further. So what then happened was, at the end of the season, we did a bunch of financial calculations, and we realized we actually came in a little under budget of what we were expecting. And I was able to get a few sponsors as well to help out here and there. And so we said, okay, 2024 can actually happen. And the 2024 season this year is really where my life completely changed on the car racing side, as obviously we won the NASA Southern California Championship and Teen Mazda Challenge for Spec Miata, and then getting nominated to the Mazda MX-5 Shootout and winning that, and now being a Mazda Factory Driver. You know, now there is definitely a future there, and it's no longer a pipe dream.
And that must be super solidifying for, you know, to your parents, like, hey, Joey is really good at this. This is like a vote of confidence in your future career.
Absolutely, and that was the biggest thing, was it was showing that, you know, all the hard work we were putting in was paying off, and it wasn't, rather than looking at it as a waste of money, we looked at it as an investment. And, you know, all of us are working flat out nonstop to make racing happen, from both a financial point of view, from a logistics point of view, from a competitive standpoint. You know, there's a lot of work that goes into it as a family. You know, it's not just simply me as the driver.
Right.
It takes a whole team.
So what I'm hearing you say is that becoming a race car driver, not only is family support important, financial support important, but you also got to like really plan out your entire career track.
Exactly.
Can you describe, because we know that you got into racing from go-karting and you fell in love with it, can you describe the process and the steps needed to become today's you, career-wise?
Yes, so karting is an interesting one as a starting point, because obviously I always recommend starting there because the physics of a go-kart are truly unparalleled. You cannot get the performance you can get in a go-kart in any other car. You know, for example, everyone says, oh, well, my sports car can pull 1G in the corners. That's cute. A go-kart can pull 2.5 of purely lateral. You add in the vertical and the longitudinal G-forces, and you can pull up to 3.7. Can't do that in a road car. So karting is the best baseline, and also from a budgeting point of view, it's definitely the most affordable, and the competition is phenomenal.
How many years of karting do you need to do to go to the next step?
There's not an exact number, to be fair, but I think the biggest thing is learning, however long it takes you to learn the racecraft and learn the speed portion. If you have both of those, you're ready to move on. And for me, it was 3.5 years. For some people, they start in a go-kart at 5 years old. And the more experience you have, the better. You know, it's definitely not a waste to be in a go-kart at 5 years old. But at the same time, me starting at 14, I proved that you don't have to start that young. You can still make a career starting later. But if I had a choice to start younger, of course I would.
So let's say at that 3.5 year mark, do you have to win any races to move on to whatever the next step is?
Technically, no. And this is the interesting part about the junior ranks in motorsport. It's not a meritocracy. So what ends up happening is the way it works is, until you're at the very top professional level, you're not being paid to race. So you have to bring the funding to a team. And so essentially, as long as you're a decent enough driver, you know, they're not going to hire some random rich guy who can afford it but can't drive a car. You know, they need someone who can drive it. But the priority is definitely, do you have the funding more than do you have the speed? Because you can always develop the speed, but at the end of the day, if you don't have the funding, logistically the season cannot happen.
So it's kind of like you have to have the skill, but also the backing of having a team and the like the consistent cash flow.
And the cash flow and the backing is really the most important part, unfortunately.
And that's in the form of either you, your parents, your family, or a sponsor.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, you have to get the money to the team one way or another. 99% of kids, it's purely family money. There's some who are very lucky and have investors from a young age who are providing a lot of money. I was lucky to have an investor help me last season. And then in the other case, it's also getting sponsors and companies and people to help out on the smaller scale. You know, that's one way I've really been able to fund this season is through networking and meeting sponsors and building community saying, you know, here's where my situation is looking like for the next season and what can we do together to create a partnership.
Now, what do the sponsors get out of supporting a young driver like yourself?
Yeah, so when everyone thinks about a motorsport sponsor, they think about, you know, a NASCAR, Formula One, where you have a big logo and you're seeing it on TV. And the one challenge is in the junior ranks, at least in the lower ranks when you're starting out, your races are not on TV and you don't have, you know, big series exposure. So you can't sell a sponsorship on, well, you're going to get X number of views. So a sponsorship is really about investing in the driver as a person and emotionally supporting the driver.
So angel investors.
Exactly.
They just love you.
They just love you. And that's where I found success is people who see my vision, they see my drive, they see my determination, and they say, I want to support this kid. And, you know, one day when he's racing in the big show, you know, great, I'll have the publicity aspect and the B2B aspect and, you know, whatever amazing opportunities come from pro racing. But the idea is saying that you were there from the beginning.
Got it. So, I mean, which is very interesting. This brings us to the stereotype aspect of it. So last year I was talking to a Porsche driver. He's also a pro driver, and he was like, look, Jimmy, I'm gonna break it down to you. You have to be rich to go into racing. And just now you said 99% of the kids, younger kids, they had their parental support.
Yep.
So that's kind of true to some extent.
100%.
How many people actually successfully get sponsorship, especially considering that they're all so young? Like, when I was 14, I didn't even know what networking is.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, it's less than 1%. I really think it's a small number. And I think there's two reasons for that. I think one, for the kids who do come from rich families who don't need the financial backing from an outside source, they don't need sponsors. So, like, why should they go through all the effort and pain to try to get sponsors? And I think from the other point of view, it's also the situation of some kids just see that their career statistically won't happen, which is not a very optimistic view, but that's a reality for a lot of people and they don't even try. And for me, I knew that, well, you know, I don't come from a family with lots of money, so if I'm gonna fund my season, it's gonna have to be through sponsors, and I'd rather fail trying than be like, you know, later in my life, oh, I wish I tried. You know, if you had the sting of regret, that would kill me the rest of my life. Just sitting there being like, well, I could have done this, but I didn't.
So are your parents your accountants too, and also your manager?
Yes. So my mom, as she goes by, she calls herself the momager. And exactly, you know, when it comes to the accounting, when it comes to the managing, we're all together as one team. And we definitely spread ourselves super thin, which is why we're often very stressed out and fatigued from all the constant 18-hour days. But we always manage to pull it together, and at the end of the day, that's what counts.
And that's on top of what they already have going on in their lives.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. So it's like a consistent battle of like racing, refining your craft, but also paying for stuff, but also getting money from investors. Whew. That's a lot.
It is. It definitely is a lot.
Do you ever get tripped up about your career choice? Like, you know, one day you just wake up and be like, holy moly, I'm a racing driver. I mean, that, to be fair, right, you're an athlete because motorsport is a form of sport. But I feel like because we see football, baseball at school, it's very easy for people to wrap their mind around like a pro athlete. But when they hear like a pro race car driver, that's pretty far away from the consciousness. Do you wake up and be like, holy moly, I'm a race car driver? What?
To be honest, I never really did until after I won the Mazda Shootout, because once it finally hit me that like, okay, Mazda's backing me, I'm part of the Mazda family, this is actually official, then I realized like, holy moly, this is a big deal. And I would say that's the real part where it did hit me for the first time, like, I'm a racing driver, and I'm racing for a manufacturer.
So in the past, you saw it kind of like a passion pursuit, a hobby, but then now it's like, this is the beginning of my career.
Exactly. Like, I always wanted it to be a career, but to be honest, it was purely just a hobby from a professionalism standpoint.
Right.
Where now, now it's properly professional.
Right. So I mean, obviously everybody has self-doubt during their career. What can trigger your self-doubt? And when you have self-doubt, what are some of the things that you're thinking to yourself?
Yeah, the biggest self-doubt I have is looking into the future or comparing myself to others and just thinking about, like, how in the world is this going to be possible? And the only way I really get over it is to just not overthink. And that was a big weakness of mine last year, was learning how to get rid of that, because it's a killer, self-doubt. Because at the end of the day, everyone's context is completely different. So you're just making an inaccurate comparison that does you no benefit.
Got it. What can trigger yourself to compare yourself to others?
I think, honestly, it's having too much time on my hands and my brain just wanders away. Because I look at my career and I think, well, okay, well, what are people my age doing as well? Because I'm always looking at it from a point of view of how can I improve? And don't get me wrong, you need some comparison. But sometimes you make comparisons that are unrealistic and the benefit isn't there. There's no actual value in what I was comparing or trying to compare to.
Got it. Do you consider yourself cool that now you're a race car driver?
What's funny was when I was in school, in high school, I always was like, not really. But then when I talked to people and told people about my passion, because I initially hid it from people, no one knew anything about me. I was a very private guy. And these people were like, holy moly, this is really cool, Joey. And I was like, I guess it is. How many people do get to race cars? That is a cool hobby to have, and obviously now a career. So I would say yes, now I definitely do consider myself a cool person. And my friends are always like, well, I'm friends with a race car driver. That sounds pretty cool.
I was going to ask you that. I saw one of the comments on your Instagram photos of like, oh, I'm friends with a race car driver, coming from one of your friends. So they think it's cool?
Absolutely.
What else do they think?
To be honest, I don't want to throw them under the rug, but I don't think they necessarily understand how the whole racing scene works, which is fun because it gives me an outside perspective. Talking to my mom and dad, they've been through the whole journey with me, so they understand it from an inside perspective. Where when I talk to my friends, they just think race car driver, racing around the country for Mazda, that's pretty amazing. And I love that perspective from them.
And then you guys make it look so easy on the screen.
Yeah.
Racing, it just seems like, oh, every car grips, but it's like a very delicate dance. Your grip is always on the edge.
Exactly, it's a total dance. And the thing is, you're driving to the limit, not over the limit, but to the limit. And it's very easy to go over the limit. It's very easy to go under the limit, but holding at the limit is the hard part, because that's where the window of performance is for being fast. So we do make it look easy. When I look at the onboard footage, I'm like, wow, the car looks great. But when I remember driving it, I was like, I was actually having to work a lot harder than that behind the wheel. And all those little inputs that are very small, you don't see those on camera. Those are purely in feel.
I think really when it comes to sports, right? Racing, parkour, I think that's what you call it.
Yeah, parkour.
These are the only sports I can think of that you're literally on the verge of life and death every time when you're doing this sport. Can't say that about badminton or table tennis, And I don't think a lot of people realize that when your parents go watch your race, it's like seeing your kids fighting with, death. In a way, it's very dangerous.
It is, and there's a great quote, I want to say it was from Ernest Hemingway. He said, racing, boxing, and mountain climbing are the only sports, the rest are simply games. And that danger factor is definitely there. And a lot of people always ask my parents, like, how do you feel watching your son race? And my mom gave an answer that I thought perfectly made sense. She said, the danger is definitely there, you can't ignore it, but I trust Joey as a driver, and there's never been a safer time to race.
Wow.
Basically what she's saying there is, yeah, the dangers are there, but the sport's only getting safer. It's not going the opposite direction. There's a constant push to improve. And that was part of the reason where she was comfortable with me racing, was she saw that, this isn't just a bunch of people doing a stupid activity. They actually are, scientific in their approach.
Gotcha. So you're 19 years old, you're racing, but you're also in college.
Correct.
What are you studying?
I am studying sports journalism at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University in downtown Phoenix.
Wow. Okay. I was going to ask you, why do you need a college degree to become to be a race car driver? But then I guess sport journalism, that makes perfect sense, because you can become a car journalist.
Exactly, and going the sports journalism route definitely helps me on track for being presentable with a good manufacturer. But to be honest, I've had that skill for long before I went to college, as I've known that's something important to work on. But the biggest thing was looking at my future. Racing is not going to be the only thing in my life. I'm going to keep myself plenty busy. And one of my other goals in racing, extending from my passion from purely driving, is being on camera and talking. And one of my career goals is to work on the media side of Formula One as a TV presenter.
And to the audience who don't know much about the professional racing scene, a race car driver is constantly running this, I would say, this campaign on yourself. You have to have the impeccable smile, the charm, the fan base, to be able to get sponsors and get the money for the next season, right? You're constantly planning ahead. So I think that studying sport journalism, being able to articulate this whole racing in your own words while still racing your own cars, this is all a part of the package of running your own campaign. It's all very holistic.
Exactly, and that's the thing is, as a driver, you have to be the complete package, If you're good off camera, or if you're good on camera and off track, but you can't drive the car well, no one's going to be interested. And the opposite is also true. If you're good on track, but you're bad off track on camera, no one's going to be interested. It's you got to wear many hats.
And that's something that we talk about actually prior to this interview, that you said you've studied some of the pro drivers, and they're all super likable off camera, off track. And that's how they have the fan base, right? And then that relationship that they build off track is one of the reasons why they're so successful. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and also how, you're set for 2025, but you have to think for the next year ahead?
Exactly. So one thing I've always done from my days in karting was having a social media page and bringing people along for the journey, because I understood that it was going to take a group of big supporters to make this happen. And I wanted to bring people along for the ride and show, here's what it was like from day one. And you can scroll back to my Instagram all the way to 2018, before I was even racing go-karts, where most kids, they are non-existent on social media and you have no idea who they are. And you have to be personable. And that's what I noticed about all the professional drivers who have successful careers and we know by name, is because they're likable. They have a story. We want to hear what they're up to. We want to know, what are they doing to prepare for a race week, and why should I support that driver? And that was my goal of my social media, and still is to this day. And the other part is showing people the route into the future, because my racing career doesn't just end with me being a Mazda Factory Driver in 2025. I got to look ahead. What about 2026? My career goal is to win the 24 Hours Le Mans. This is one of the steps to getting there. So,
how many years are you preparing yourself for Le Mans?
My goal is to get there in 5 years. It's extremely ambitious. A lot of people think maybe too ambitious, but I like an ambitious goal because it keeps me motivated, it keeps me on track, and you got to set the bar high. But obviously, don't be too unrealistic. I said I want to get to Le Mans in 1 year. That's not going to happen. But 5 years, a lot can happen. I think about 5 years ago, I was just getting into racing go-karts. So never say never.
Does your contract with Mazda as a factory driver have a time limit?
I don't know the exact details on that, to be honest, but what I do know is, as far as the 2025 season, it is for the full year. And the thing with Mazda that's unique when you win the shootout is, even if you're not selected as a factory driver necessarily for the following season, trying to move up to a series like MX-5 Cup or stay in Spec MX-5, the relationship with Mazda does not end. They're still going to help me in my career, and I'm still going to be part of the Mazda family. So it's kind of one of those, you're in it for life.
So you're running an inexhaustible campaign
Yes.
for yourself. it kind of reminds me of like a presidential election. You got to lay out your plan, your vision, and tell a story.
It's 100% the same.
And it takes many years to build.
It does. And I think that's actually a great analogy because in essence, you're trying to get supporters. You don't have to, get people to vote you in, but in one case, you do need to have the financial backing, the emotional backing. People want to like you, and you're right. You always are in the public sphere, and it's a non-stop job.
You ready for some personal questions?
Let's do it.
Are your parents in the car business?
No. So this is what's interesting is my mom is a graphic designer, and she came from the toy industry, working for Mattel and Disney. And then my dad, he's worn a lot of hats in his career. So I guess I'll start with the beginning of, after leaving the military, he then went into aviation, where he spent the majority of his life buying and selling airplanes, flying small airplanes, then managing airplanes, and really aviation is kind of the core of his life. But then over the last 6 years or so, he's ventured into working in one of his other hobbies, which is motorcycles. And so he's a motorcycle instructor for Bartels Harley Davidson, running the riding academy, teaching people how to get involved in the whole world of motorcycles.
Wow. Okay. So it's a little bit closer to motorsport, but not quite.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
understand this thrill.
There's a little bit of, there's definitely the boys' toys theme. We definitely have that adrenaline rush in the family.
Got it. Wow. So now, that being said, is making a living possible for a race car driver down the line?
Absolutely. And
what would that look like? How does that work?
Essentially the way it works, and I'll give the example of sports car racing since that's what I'm trying to pursue. You want to be signed by a manufacturer. So whether that's, we'll use GT3 racing for example to make it easy, so we're on current standards. So let's say that's someone like Mercedes, BMW, or Porsche, or whoever. As a driver for that manufacturer, there's a base salary per year as you're working for that manufacturer. And then there's per race payouts based on results and kind of where they schedule you around. And then it gets confusing because they also use you on development of the road cars and getting your advice with engineers. So then if there's random testing. So it's not necessarily like a 9-to-5 job where there's a set salary if you make X amount per year. It's very specific per manufacturer based on what they want and what series you're running in as well.
Got it. So that job title is brand sponsored driver, or?
I guess it would just be professional driver or factory driver.
But is that factory driver different from your factory driver?
It is, because in my factory driver case, I'm still in the junior rank, so Mazda is giving me a free drive. I'm not being paid. I'm just breaking even, which is amazing. So what's different in pro racing is you're actually being paid, and it's profitable.
Why would it be profitable for Mazda to pay a driver to drive?
Because in a series like GT3 or even sometimes an MX-5 Cup, where there are maybe a couple paid drivers, the biggest thing is the connection to the road car side. When you look at an MX-5 Cup car on track, that's the same chassis as the ND MX-5 road car. So the idea is that you see the race car and you say, how can this help sell road cars? And so racing for the manufacturers is purely a marketing exercise. The people at the company love the whole adrenaline rush from the speed, and they want to say, well, how can we turn this into our actual business, which is selling road cars?
So it's almost like a luxury brand, for example, like Gucci or Chanel running an ad campaign. And that ad campaign doesn't really make money from the campaign itself, but it helps building the company's image.
Exactly, and that's what racing's about. It's purely the company's image. And by seeing a series like MX-5 Cup, you say, hey, look at that, Mazda has a motorsports division. Mazda has a vested interest in racing and performance driving. That's really cool. Whereas if a manufacturer doesn't have any racing series, you're not going to look at them as a sports car manufacturer or a manufacturer that makes cars that you want to drive fast. So for every manufacturer, it's all about perception and how we view them.
Got it. So in the same analogy of like the fashion brands, you're like the model that they hired to act in the ad, or the model to walk the runway.
100%.
Okay. To wear their clothes, to walk the runway, and then they can sell clothes to the consumers.
And we literally do wear their clothes. You have the Mazda logo on the race suit. You have all the logos of the partners, and it's exactly like being a fashion model, except instead of clothes, which you do have, you also have a car as well.
How far are you from achieving that goal?
Well, if we stick to the 5-year plan, we're about 3 years away from that, or 2 years away. But
Before Le Mans.
before Le Mans, yeah. Before Le Mans, I think we're 4 to 5 years away. And I think from the point of view of being a professional driver for a manufacturer, we're about 3 to 4 years away.
Okay, got it. Wow, so that's not too far away.
No, exactly. It's super close.
So that answers my question. So in between this time and when you become that, factory driver until you winning the Le Mans, during this time you still need sponsors, you still need help. Is that what it is?
Exactly, and that's the thing is, until you're at the very top level, you have to find the funding. So it doesn't end here. Being a Mazda Factory Driver for 2025 is not the end. It's actually really just the beginning. The way I look at it is, now being able to say that I'm a Mazda Motorsports Factory Driver, it's not necessarily going to open any doors where everyone's going to be like, oh, come drive my car. It's more of, you have all these opportunities that exist in motorsport, but you need credibility. And now having Mazda's backing and their belief and their support is able to give me the key to open that door. I still have to find the door and open the door, but I now have the ability to.
Absolutely. So if anybody watching wants to support Joey's career in the next 5 years, he definitely needs help. And wouldn't you say that every dollar counts?
Absolutely. And one project I'm working on, which is going to have the hard launch next week finally, is my crowdfunding campaign. So one challenge in motorsport, besides simply the financial aspect, is when it comes to getting actual funding, you have a budget of a season. Now, I'm going to use round numbers here. These aren't the actual numbers of what the season costs. But let's say, for example, a hypothetical season in a racing series costs $100,000. It's going to be very difficult in the junior ranks to get a sponsor to give you $50,000 to cover half your season. Because for them, what is the return on investment in the short term for that series that costs $100,000 where they're giving you 50? It's not there. So it's a lot easier to get 10 people to give you $1,000 than one person give you $10,000. So my idea going into 2025 was looking at a driver from Porsche Carrera Cup 10 years ago named Dino Zamparelli. And he funded his season through crowdfunding. He was from the town of Bristol in the UK, and he called the hood of his car, or the bonnet as the Brits call it, the Bristol bonnet. And he got a bunch of people and companies for a much smaller amount of money to have their chance to have their name on the car by donating to his crowdfunding campaign. And he literally covered his entire car in these names. And he was able to fund his season and make a racing career from that. So for 2025, I'm going to be doing that on my Spec MX-5 car. So I have 2 tiers to make it simple. And the third tier that's not part of the crowdfunding is being a direct sponsor. And being a direct sponsor is not going to have a specific price, but crowdfunding will. And the goal is keeping it simple. So the first level is $100. And for the $100, you're going to get a Stiglet shirt, some Stiglet stickers, and you're going to have, I'm going to have a crowdfunding page on my website. Well, there'll be a little thank you. And you're going to be part of this group who will have the exclusive Stiglet merchandise that you can only get through the crowdfunding. Then at the $250 level is where you'll actually get to have your name on the car, in addition to all of the other benefits. So that way you can actually say your name is on the race car, and there's tangible evidence that you can show people that you can say you sponsored a race car.
Got it. Wow, okay. How much money do you need for a season?
For Spec MX-5, before I had the Mazda Shootout, I was projecting around $90,000. That was my goal. And that was basically including purchasing the car, then all the running costs of the car and the transportation. With winning the Shootout, we're still going to need a lot of money. And Mazda estimates that what they're providing is going to be worth around $50,000. Although what's unique about the Mazda Shootout, and this is part of the brilliance of Mazda, is what they give you is not $50,000 in cash. And that's important because if it's in cash, it's taxable. So they're going to be providing tires. And so things like tires and entry fees in the car. So that way, it's hard to put an exact number on it, but $50,000 is what they estimate. So we're about halfway funded for next season. So there's still a lot of work to do. But the other thing is, that's only the 2025 season that's halfway funded. We have to talk about the long term in 2026.
Oh boy.
And
Jeez.
one of my goals for 2025 is to be testing in a Mazda MX-5 Cup car and do a Mazda MX-5 Cup race. But that's completely separate to the budget that Mazda's giving me and at $90,000. So I'm still working nonstop to get the sponsors and investors, as I have to make, not just 2025 be amazing, but I want to make myself set up for a successful 2026.
So is one season 1 year?
Yes.
Okay, just to clarify. So money aside, let's just take a little breather. I feel like when I heard that $90,000 number, I got a little headache.
And most people naturally do. That is a lot of money.
I don't know how you can handle that, like just crowdfunding that much, but it's definitely tough. And that just goes to show your commitment, because you made it. You made it all the way here.
Exactly, and that's the thing is, I don't know exactly how that money's going to come in. It's not going to be 100% through crowdfunding, but it's all about, you shave a little bit here and there, whether it's, finding deals on your traveling, finding deals on your tires, finding deals on parts you buy. It's all about where can I slice parts of the budget to make it happen.
Got it.
That's what counts.
Well, let's get to some of the fun questions I have for you.
Let's do it.
First of all, are you single?
I am.
Okay, I think everybody wants to know that.
Yes.
So how do you tell your dates what you do? Do you just say I'm a race car driver? Or?
Pretty much. That's exactly what I say. And I like to keep it simple with people because obviously, as we've seen in this conversation, there's a lot to racing that definitely overwhelms people. So I start with the simple fact, I'm a racing driver.
Have you said that yet? Because you only recently consider yourself a race car driver.
I have, yeah. I've actually said it pretty early on. And I think because socially, when you try to explain to people that you're an up-and-coming driver, you're in the junior ranks, and they don't really want to hear details. They want to know, okay, what do you actually do? I race cars. Simple as that.
What was their reaction?
The reaction is often, wow, that's really cool. I've never met anyone who's done that. And that's true. There's not a lot of us drivers out there. And motorsport is kind of its own little hidden community. So the general public doesn't really get the chance to meet people who are involved in the industry, let alone who are drivers.
So it sounds like they perceive it as a pretty cool thing.
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you say that, okay, because in today's climate, right, the economy is a little bit rough, inflation and everything. So I know that when it comes to dating, a lot of people want to find a partner that is loaded. So do you think that in that aspect, being a race car driver is a plus or a minus in today's socioeconomics environment?
I think from a social point of view, definitely a plus. From an economic point of view, definitely a minus. Not to say that I'm not going to be able to afford to take someone to dinner. I'm not that stupid with my finances, but it's definitely a challenge to people when I explain that they see the outside of my life and they think, oh, you must have some extra money because you're racing cars and it's a hobby. And I'm like, no, it's my life. That's where all my money's going. That's where all my time is going. And I just have to fit my life into it one way or another. And it all revolves around racing.
Got it. Have you ever had dates that just straight up asking you, how much money do you make? Or how does that work financially?
Not on a first date, no.
Okay. Got it. Second date, third date? Have anyone ever asked you?
It's usually going to be, honestly, even later. It's going to be a fourth or into a relationship, I would say. Because it's such a detailed question that most people are still blown away by just the race car driver part, that they're not even prepared to ask questions. Because naturally, most people, they don't know anything about racing, which is totally understandable.
So when you do get to that part, was it a positive thing for them to hear or a turn off?
I would say generally a positive thing. And there's two reasons. One, I'm not saying it's positive that, I get to pretend I'm the underdog. Because don't get me wrong, my story definitely is an underdog story. And I'm not using that to impress people or try to, make people perceive I am a certain way or I'm not a certain way. But what it shows them is that my grit and determination is there and I'm very hardworking. And in that regard, it's definitely a positive, especially when I tell the story over the progression of the last 5 years and what I want the next 5 years to look like. People see that and they think, wow, that's pretty impressive.
And your story is not the story of I became a lawyer, I make this much money now. But it's just more a story of your character.
Exactly, and that's the unique part about racing is there's no direct path to get to the top. So when you're driving, it's a strange career to pursue because there is no like one thing of, well, here's where you need to go race, here's where you need to live, here's how much money you need to make, here's what series you need to go drive, here's what car you need to drive. There's so many ways to get to the top, and the question is, can you get to the top? But also, there's a lot of top-level series, so everyone has different career goals. So it's a very strange industry compared to, say, wanting to be a lawyer, where it's like, do well in school, take the right classes, go to law school, here's where you need to go apprentice, and it's very different in that regard.
Wouldn't you say the entire automotive / motorsport industry is very abstract and somewhat unregulated?
100%.
Right? It's like you got to forge your own path. You got to be very creative in terms of how you want to make money.
Exactly, and that's the thing is, it's an industry where, apart from the engineering and manufacturing side, it's not, well, and obviously you have the marketing side, but it's not really corporatized that much like people expect. It's a lot of individual workers who are trying to find their path and where they fit in. And when you look at a manufacturer or you look at, a race team, there's so many people that are required to make the operation work, but yet every team operates completely differently. And that's what makes the industry very interesting.
Unlike other sports industries, such as basketball, you can just buy a ball and start it practicing.
Exactly.
There's so many prerequisites.
Yeah, and that's the biggest challenge is I can't just simply go test a race car in my backyard. I have to go drive to a track or have my car here. Right now it's across the country, so even testing is a massive challenge, and that's part of the logistics you have to work out.
Wow, Joey. So, at the end of the interview, I just want to ask you this: how do pro drivers like yourself typically see car people? Let me clarify. The car people are the ones who are very knowledgeable about like the 991.1. It's like they know every model of every car, but they don't race. They can't really drive that fast. How do you see people like that?
I have two views, to be honest. I think the majority of people are nice people who, cars for them is a hobby. They love it, and they have the same passion that I do, except, for them it's not a career. And with those people, I get along great, and it's nothing but a fun time. Then there's another group of people where, for them, they act like they're know-it-alls, and I don't get pissed off at them because, as I've learned from one of my mentors, a great phrase, not my monkey, you just don't engage with those people. Or if you do, you find a way to humble them, but you be polite about it. I'm not one of those people who plays the politics game of, well, who knows who, and what have you driven, how much money have you made? I think that's a stupid game to play.
And what's so interesting though? Like literally all of the pro drivers that I talk to tell me that, Jimmy, I have not even mastered the driving dynamics of the Miata yet. There's so much to learn, and every time they drive, they feel like it's a new lesson, right?
Yeah.
While the car people always feel like they need to upgrade to something newer. You see teenagers getting an M3 as their 18th birthday gift, and then 2 weeks later they crash on Angeles Crest, and you hear the news.
And they get an M4.
Right, or you see people driving like a Hellcat. I have no idea why they would be getting that car. I know you also see non-pro drivers claiming that, there's a huge difference between the GT3 RS and GT3, and then they say that they can feel it. I'm like, okay, what a stark contrast.
Yeah, and I agree with you. A lot of people, they like to blame the equipment because they don't really want to explore what they can do as a driver because it takes time. And I'll give you a good story about the feel of a car. People say, well, this car does this car does that. Yeah, okay, someone can generally judge if a car is understeery or oversteery. But the fine details, it takes a very, very long time to judge. And I remember last year I was with my race engineer at Buttonwillow, and we were testing in the Spec Miata for the race weekend. And he decided to play a game of making blind setup changes. So essentially, he would change something on the car, and I have to tell him how is the car responding differently to the session prior. So we do things such as playing with the ride height, adjusting the rear toe, or playing with anti-roll bar stiffness. And the goal is for me as a driver to learn what does the car feel like and what do I like. And I failed the test miserably. He made some changes, I didn't even feel it. Like, he made one change where on the ride height, and this is the rear rake angle, so you're playing with the weight distribution, which massively affects how a car drives. Made a huge change that would be considered unbelievably radical if we were to do it on a race weekend with a driver who actually could feel the car well. And I didn't even feel a difference. So that was me with 3.5 years of karting experience and a few months of car driving experience, failing that test. So for the average person who's never even driven a car on track, they're not going to feel the small differences. And so I guess the level of difference that we're feeling on track compared to the road is so minute and so small.
I feel like your skill level has to be up there to really bring out the difference in cars.
Exactly, and it's one of those things where it just takes time. There's a great phrase: seat time, seat time, seat time, and it's so true. And by the end of the year, my sensitivity on the car was phenomenal, to the point where I could detect parts that were failing way before they failed. And that's the difference between winning a race or having a DNF because the car broke down.
And I would even say that, and correct if I'm wrong, I would even say that very few people on this planet can really juice out every ounce of what a Porsche GT3 can offer.
Exactly.
And to truly feel the difference between like a regular GT3, I mean regular GT3 sounds ridiculous, and an RS version of it. Very few people. If you're not a professional driver, chances are you cannot feel the difference. Chances are that you cannot push that GT3 to the extent that you think that you're pushing.
Well, exactly. And the other thing is, on the road, you literally can't. That's the funny part. A lot of people were like, well, I get to go 110 miles an hour on this road. Great. But guess what? You're braking at 20% of that car's capacity. That doesn't mean anything. You're cornering at 40% of that car's potential. That doesn't mean anything.
Which is so funny to see Z06 being on sale, GT3s being sold as like a road car to civilians. But I guess they're just collectibles for people at this point,
Exactly, and for people, they see it purely as, it's an emotional investment, and I want to go buy one.
Right.
Which there's nothing wrong with, as long as you buy the car with the right mentality of, at the end of the day, it's a road car. Because then people really get disappointed is when they take their favorite road car on a racetrack and they discover it's not meant for racing and it's not any good on track. That's a shocker for some people.
That just goes back to show you that even car enthusiasts don't quite know what racing really looks like. A cup car is like just a piece of metal wrapping around you. I mean, that's actual racing. Are there any specific fitness and diet routine that you have to follow as a race car driver? Because I know that I have a pro driver friend who has a personal fitness coach. Then there are exercises for like your ankles or like your core. Do you have anything like that?
Yes, so I work with my physio named Greg, and he has a company called Racers Performance. And together we just started officially working this season, although I met him back when I was racing go-karts. And he basically puts together for me a whole bunch of training programs so I can ensure that on a race weekend I'm physically prepared as possible. And together this year, it's been incredible to see the progress I've made, because with him, it's all about details, just like driving, except on the health side. And, to be fast in a race car, it's not simply just the actual driving technique, but making sure mentally and physically you're in the right headspace so you can actually, get the most out of yourself consistently. And working with him has been great. And as far as, the dietary side, we're not super strict of like, oh, I need to be this many calories and, this many grams of this and that. It's more, here's foods to eat on race weekends, here's foods to avoid, here's how I should be preparing, and that's more the dietary side. But as far as the physical training and the warm-up side, we're always every weekend talking about how can we improve on that side and really, maximize our performance in every aspect possible.
Do all race car drivers have their fitness coach?
All professional drivers do, to my knowledge. As far as most drivers in the junior ranks, they don't. Sometimes manufacturers will give a driver a trainer, like Red Bull does, for example. But for like me starting, even Spec Miata with him, that's very much unheard of.
So now, are these fitness routines specifically designed for drivers?
Yes, they are.
What are they?
So the biggest thing in driving that you have to work on is honestly having a well-balanced and well-proportioned body. So it's a combination of strength, of obviously, when you're driving cars with no power steering, or, really stiff brake pedals, and having good footwork. You need to have strength so you can be precise. Then it's cardio, because you're in a race car that's 140 degrees for a 45-minute race, and you have lots of adrenaline going through you. And mentally, in addition to driving, you have the racecraft side of racing wheel to wheel. It's a chess game. So you need to be really strong on the cardiovascular side. And then the other part is flexibility and mobility, because when you're in a race car, you're sat in one position where you cannot move at all for 45 minutes or however long the race is, and you have to be comfortable in that car. And part of that comfort comes in making sure that your body can have really good mobility.
Got it. And also understanding of your own physiology, so you can adjust your seats and pedal position accordingly.
Exactly. And the seating position is one of the most important things. And I'm a driver who, I take a very long time my seat fit. Everyone knows. I've spent hours and hours and hours doing seat fits, but it's for a good reason, because when I'm in a race car, I'm genuinely comfortable. Most people, they look at it, they see the roll cage, see the seat with no padding, and they're like, whoa, this looks terrible, and the 5-point harness. But when I'm in there, I can fall asleep in the race car. I love it. So I'm very detail oriented about making sure it's exactly perfect, because when I'm in an environment where not only putting my life in the line, but I need to perform and be so precise, I want to make sure that I'm as comfortable as possible and I'm ready to perform at my best.
So is core exercise important?
Yes, absolutely. The one thing when you're driving is, even though you're belted down and belted down really tight, your body still has a little bit of movement to it. But the most important part is your body being stable, because there's a great saying in racing, which is the car goes where your eyes go. So essentially, when you're on track or even on the road, you want to be always looking ahead, left and right, or in your mirrors or wherever you're looking. And for your head and neck to be stable, it all starts with your core. So having a strong core is super, super important for that.
Got it. What about glutes exercise? Because I'm imagining you're sitting for an extended period of time, your glutes kind of shut down, right?
They do. And that is one thing, is your legs do get uncomfortable towards the end, simply from the fact of you're doing a lot with your feet, from the heel toe downshifting to the left foot braking to, really having to operate so precisely, because the pedals, they're just as important as the steering wheel in terms of getting a car around a corner.
Right.
So your legs have to be really strong as well. But most importantly, they have to have the endurance to them, If you're strong on a, leg press, but you're not consistent on a racetrack for over 5 minutes, that's useless.
So maybe that's why all of the race car drivers that I know of are all lean and mean, because that's the ideal physique.
Exactly. And the other thing is, in racing, you have a minimum weight limit. So you want to make the car as light as possible, but it's actually favorable if the driver is lighter than the minimum weight limit, because then when you add ballast to the car to meet the minimum weight limit, you can choose where the ballast goes, and that has a huge performance impact.
Oh, I didn't know
So
that.
if you can have the ballast on the floor of the car, that's a lot better than having the ballast in your shoulders, because you have a lower center of gravity in the car.
Got it. So that kind of goes back to our first question. 5'8" to 5'11", a little bit on the lighter side. That's actually a technical advantage.
Absolutely, it's a huge technical advantage. Height-wise, not being too tall is important, because it makes your seat fit easier, as some cars are just going to be really, really small. And then from a weight point of view, that's really the biggest thing of car performance. We want the car to be as light as possible, and at the races, the car weight is measured driver plus car, because that's what's happening on track.
Well, so that being said, Joey, I think that's the end of our interview. I thoroughly enjoyed getting to know you a little bit more, hearing your insight. I'm pretty sure that the national audience is going to love it too.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say to wrap this up?
Well, thank you again for this opportunity. I hope you've enjoyed hearing my story and learning all about my crazy adventures I've been up to and where I see my career going. And, as we always say with cars and being car enthusiasts, it's not just about the cars, but it's about the people and all the connections we make along the way. And that's why I love this journey, and that's why I decided, you know what, I'm gonna go try to pursue a career in racing, because you never know what can happen.
Gotcha. So everybody should go racing.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.